The heat struck like a living thing. Commander Elias Ward stepped off the shuttle ramp and felt the air of Vorik Prime close around him, a furnace atmosphere thick with metal vapor and ozone. The world of the KRYLL Dominion glowed with molten rivers that crisscrossed the plains, feeding cyclopean forge towers whose throats spat flame into the sky. It was said that on Vorik Prime, the mountains themselves sweated iron. Eli adjusted the seals on his heat suit, eyes squinting against the shimmer. "Feels like standing inside a blast furnace," he muttered. Beside him, Lieutenant Ron Devens gave a low whistle. "And they live here by choice." "They were born to it," Eli replied, watching the alien escort approach. Tall, four-armed beings of scaled bronze skin and eyes like lit coals. At their head strode Vorik Tharn, the Dominion's forge master, a legend whose name carried weight even among human metallurgists. His armor rippled like mercury, each plate alive with internal light. "You are the Terran metallurgist," Vorik said, voice resonant, vibrating through the air as much as sound. "We have heard of your primitive forges." Eli smiled thinly. "Primitive maybe, but dependable." The alien's jaw flexed in amusement. "Dependable tools are for miners, not for makers of the impossible." Vorik gestured for them to follow.
"Come.
Witness how true matter bends before our fire." They entered a hall carved directly from a volcano's throat. Hundreds of alien smiths worked in perfect unison, manipulating molten alloys with gravitic fields, shaping them in midair without hammer or tongs. Each stroke of energy produced a harmonic tone that resonated in Eli's chest. At the center, a massive crucible churned with silver fire. Vorik stepped forward and plunged a gloved hand into the liquid metal. When he withdrew it, the metal obeyed his gesture, folding itself into a blade of flawless geometry, no seams, no marks of labor. "This," Vorik declared, "is impossible steel. It does not corrode, does not shatter, and cannot be reforged because perfection admits no improvement." The KRYLL crowd hissed approval, their voices blending into a metallic chorus. Eli approached the blade resting on its pedestal. It was beautiful, utterly flawless, yet somehow lifeless, as if forged by calculation rather than passion. He tapped its surface with a fingernail. The sound rang clear, sterile. "Impressive," he said at last. "How long did it take to learn that process?" Vorik's upper eyes narrowed. 70 generations of study. Every atom is placed where it must be. Your kind cannot replicate it. Ron leaned close to Eli and whispered, "I think he just called us stupid." Eli kept his voice even.
"No.
He called us unfinished." He turned back to Vorik. "Maybe that's the difference. We don't stop learning just because we found something that works." A ripple passed through the alien audience, something between confusion and insult. Vorik's lower hands clenched. "Are you suggesting you can make a stronger alloy, human?" "I'm saying strength isn't just imperfection." Eli took a step closer to the forge, the heat pressing against his visor. "Sometimes the best steel carries its scars." Vorik gave a low, rumbling laugh. "You would challenge the Dominion's craft? Your forges use flame and hammer, children's toys." But his tone sharpened with curiosity. "Perhaps there is merit in spectacle. What would you propose, Terran? Let me use your materials." "No alien tech, no plasma fields, just ore, heat, and hands." "Absurd," Vorik scoffed. "You cannot even manipulate our ores without molecular stabilizers." "Then I'll find another way." The Forge Master's eyes glowed brighter. "And what will you call this little experiment?" Eli's mouth curved into a half-smile. "Proof of concept." A murmur spread through the KRYLL ranks. Some laughed openly. Others whispered in low metallic clicks, intrigued despite themselves. Vorik extended an arm toward a side passage lined with molten conduits. "Very well. You may use Forge Vault 9. Bring your hands, human, and we shall see how long flesh lasts in true fire." Captain Merrick Holt, leader of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, caught Eli's arm before he moved. "You don't have to do this, Ward. We're here to negotiate trade rights, not start cultural wars." Eli met his gaze. Trade's about respect, Captain. They won't respect us until they see what we can do. Ron groaned. You realize they build armor that can shrug off plasma artillery, right? What do we have? Hammers. Exactly. Eli said, eyes glinting. That's the point. They followed the escort through the corridors of the forge complex, every wall veined with glowing ore. The hum of reactors mixed with the deep, rhythmic pulse of molten flow, a planet's heartbeat. When they reached Vault 9, the doors sealed behind them with a hiss. The chamber inside was empty except for raw ore blocks and a single anvil the size of a vehicle. Ron looked around. You sure about this, boss? Eli removed his helmet, letting the heat wash over his face.
No.
But I'm sure they need to see something they've forgotten. He ran a hand over the alien ore, dense, heavier than tungsten, with a grain that shimmered under the forge light. They think perfection makes them strong. We'll remind them what imperfection can do. The chamber's temperature rose as he lit the first furnace, old-fashioned and human-made. The roar of the flames filled the space, primitive and raw against the precision hum of alien forges outside. Ron adjusted the bellows. Feels like we're reenacting the Iron Age in a sci-fi museum. Eli grinned. Then let's make history twice. Outside, Vorik watched through a transparent observation panel, arms crossed. He rejects plasma stabilization, he said to Archivist Zareth, who stood recording every movement. He uses direct flame. He hammers by hand. It is madness. Zareth's voice was soft, curious. And yet the human's eyes. They burn like ours did, long ago. Vorik said nothing. His gaze lingered on the sparks bursting inside the chamber, the rhythmic clang of steel on anvil echoing even through soundproof barriers. Each strike carried a strange resonance, a cadence unfamiliar to KRYLL ears, less mechanical, more alive. Eli lost track of time as the first layers took shape. Sweat poured down his arms, hissing as it met the forge heat. He folded the glowing metal again and again, mixing alien ore with fragments of Terran steel he'd brought from his kit. The fusion left unpredictable patterns that shimmered like ripples on water. Ron wiped his forehead. You think this'll actually work? Eli didn't look up. It already is. By the time the last fold was done, the blade was rough, ugly even, but when he quenched it, the cooling metal sang, a clear tone that reverberated through the vault. Vorik straightened, startled. What is that sound? Zareth whispered. The steel, Vorik said quietly. It sings. Inside, Eli examined his unfinished creation, the patterned surface alive under the light. He exhaled, exhausted but satisfied. Tomorrow, he murmured, we'll see if beauty can cut perfection. Outside, the alien forge masters watched in silence, the laughter gone from their eyes. And for the first time in generations, Vorik Tharn felt something unfamiliar in his chest, anticipation. The forge chamber had become a world of its own, an island of flame and clangor surrounded by alien silence. For 3 days, Elias Ward and Lieutenant Ron Devons worked within it, eating little, sleeping less. The heat scoured their throats raw, the air heavy with metallic dust that shimmered like a false aurora. Beyond the observation glass, the KRYLL watched, their silhouettes wavering in the glow like statues carved from living bronze. Eli's hands were blistered, his arms trembling from endless hammering, but his eyes burned with focus. Each strike fell with deliberate rhythm, folding the alien alloy into layers that glowed blue, then violet, then white. The metal resisted him, as if conscious of its own superiority. Yet, with every blow, it yielded a little more, reluctant but inevitable. 3 days, Ron said, his voice rasping. You sure we're not just making a very expensive paperweight? Eli chuckled weakly. That's what they said about Damascus steel when it was rediscovered. It looked impossible, too. Ron leaned on the anvil, sweat tracing dark paths through the soot on his face. And how exactly are you making it without carbon control, without the right tools, without half your sanity? Instinct, Eli said, folding the blade again. and a lot of respect for failure. He paused to study the cooling pattern. The KRYLL think perfection is strength. They forget that imperfection, randomness, is what keeps a lattice from collapsing under stress. Nature never builds perfect lines. Neither should we. From behind the glass, Vorik Tharn turned to archivist Zurath. He speaks of flaws as virtues. Does he mock the forge? Zurath's fingers clicked across the data slate. No. Forge master. He worships it differently. He believes beauty lies in struggle. Struggle breaks things. Yet his blade still holds. Inside, Eli dipped the glowing steel into the quench barrel. Steam erupted in a hiss so violent it made Ron flinch. A ring echoed through the chamber, higher-pitched than any they'd heard before. The sound didn't die, it sustained, vibrating in their bones like a distant note from a living instrument. Eli lifted the blade. Its surface had changed. Patterns of flowing silver and shadow ran through it like ripples on a wind-touched lake. The reflection bent the light oddly, as if the metal refused to stay still. Ron stared. That's not normal. Good, Eli murmured. Normal sporing. He tested the balance, slicing the air. The blade hummed faintly, a resonance that made Ron's teeth ache. Eli smiled, exhausted but alive. It's singing. You said that yesterday. You ever gonna tell me what that means? Eli rested the blade on the anvil. When the lattice aligns imperfectly, tiny flaws scattered through structure, it resonates under motion. That resonance dissipates shock, like how a tree bends with wind instead of snapping. So it's not impossible steel, Ron said. It's impossible philosophy. Eli smirked. Yeah. Try explaining that to aliens who think math is art. Through the observation barrier, Vorik's expression was unreadable. He's making progress, Zurath said quietly. Vorik didn't answer. His eyes followed the human's movements, each blow, each adjustment, every pause to think rather than measure. There was no calibration device, no molecular alignment scanner, yet the human seemed to sense when the metal wanted to change. It reminded Vorik of his youth, before Dominion science replaced instinct with calculation. Inside the vault, fatigue finally caught up to Eli. His knees buckled, and he sat on the floor beside the anvil, staring at the glowing weapon. Ron handed him a flask of tepid water. You should rest. Eli nodded absently, eyes unfocused. You know what my uncle used to say? Probably something about blowing up a garage. Eli smiled faintly. He said a forge isn't about heat. It's about time. You don't rush steel. You live with it till it trusts you. Ron shook his head. You and your poetic metallurgy. Eli took a sip, set the flask down, and stared at the blade. The rippling patterns reflected his face, distorted by the metal's uneven layers. He saw exhaustion there, but also defiance. You know, he said softly, they call their alloy impossible steel, but they made it that way on purpose. Perfect structure, fixed symmetry. It's static.
Dead. If something's truly alive, it adapts.
It changes. Like people. Exactly. A dull chime echoed from the corridor outside, the alien signal for the 10th cycle. Vorik entered the vault with 2 KRYLL apprentices, their armor gleaming in the dim heat. The forge master studied the human work without speaking. It's finished? Vorik asked at last. Eli stood, wiping his hands on his soot-stained suit. As finished as anything human ever gets. The alien's gaze lingered on the blade, its rippled surface reflecting the forge fires.
Crude.
Uneven. Chaotic grain structure. Unbreakable, Eli said simply. Vorik extended a taloned finger, tapping the metal. It rang, softer than his own alloys, yet carried depth, a vibration that thrummed in the bones. Vorik frowned, tapping again. The note changed slightly, adjusting itself, as if responding. How did you? Eli shrugged. You listen long enough, and it tells you what it wants to be. Vorik looked genuinely unsettled, a crack in the armor of his confidence. No machine can replicate that sound. Maybe that's why we use hands. The forge master turned sharply. Tomorrow at dawn, we test your creation. It will strike against impossible steel. If it endures, the Dominion will acknowledge its merit. If it fails, his voice deepened, like a furnace draw. Your species will be known for arrogance, not artistry. Eli met his stare without flinching. Fair terms. Vorik gestured to his apprentices, and the aliens departed with mechanical precision. The door sealed again, leaving only the whisper of cooling metal behind. Ron exhaled slowly. You realize we're betting humanity's reputation on your hobby blade? Eli chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. I prefer to think of it as public relations through metallurgy. Ron groaned. You're insane. Probably. Eli looked at the blade resting on the anvil, its edge faintly glowing in the dim forge light. He traced one finger along its length, feeling the faint hum through the glove. But maybe that's what this place needs, a little human madness. Outside the vault, Vorik paused by the observation deck, eyes reflecting the distant flame. Zureth approached quietly. Do you believe he will fail? Vorik didn't answer for a long time. Failure would make sense, he said finally. But sense does not explain that sound. Then you doubt. The forge master's jaw tightened. I remember a time when we sang to metal, before science silenced us. He turned toward the glowing vault. Perhaps tomorrow, I will remember again. Inside, Eli lay back on the warm floor, arms folded beneath his head. Ron snored softly nearby. The blade beside them pulsed faintly with residual heat, a heartbeat in steel. Eli stared at the ceiling and whispered to the quiet forge, You and me, old friend. Tomorrow, we make them believe. The flames flickered as if answering him, and somewhere deep within the alien metal, a low note trembled, neither human nor KRYLL, but something entirely new. Dawn came to Vorik Prime like the opening of a furnace door. The sky burned crimson, the air thick with vaporized metal and dust. Within the great forge hall, the Dominion gathered, rows upon rows of KRYLL artisans, soldiers, and engineers, their eyes glowing in the molten light. It was not merely an exhibition. It was judgment. At the chamber's heart stood two pedestals. On one, the flawless blade of impossible steel, gleaming with alien symmetry. On the other, Elias Ward's rough-forged creation, duller, uneven, rippled like flowing water. Between them, the heat shimmered, carrying the scent of iron and challenge. Ron stood beside Eli, his face pale under the orange glare. You sure this is a good idea? No, Eli said, tightening the straps of his heat suit. But it's the right one. Vorik Tharn descended from the upper platform, each step echoing like a hammer blow. His armor caught the forge light, refracting it in cascading hues. Human, he intoned, you stand before the Dominion's craft. Our steel has endured 10,000 collapses of suns. Do you still wish to test your crude art? Eli met his gaze calmly. Every craftsman tests his work, forge master. Even gods crack their tools to see what they're made of. A low murmur ran through the alien ranks, shock, perhaps respect. Vorik gestured toward a massive automaton bearing the mark of the KRYLL Foundry Guild. The construct lifted the impossible steel blade with mechanical precision and positioned it for the trial. The contest is simple, Vorik said. Your blade will strike ours. Strength will speak for itself. Eli nodded and stepped forward. The heat bit into his skin, the floor thrumming beneath his boots. He lifted his sword, the Damascus-like blade forged from alien ore and human stubbornness. Its surface shimmered faintly, alive with flowing patterns that caught the light like liquid smoke. For a heartbeat, the forge hall fell utterly silent. Then Vorik gave the command. Eli swung. The impact was like thunder. The sound rippled through the hall, vibrating the molten conduits in the walls. Sparks erupted in a blinding arc. Ron flinched, shielding his eyes. When the haze cleared, the impossible steel blade lay split in two, its severed edge clean as glass. The audience gasped, their voices clattering into a discordant echo. Eli's own blade quivered in his hands, humming softly but intact. The resonance filled the hall, a low, living tone that seemed to hum in every chest. Vork's gaze widened. He stepped forward, crouching to examine the fracture of the Dominion's pride. The cut ran molecularly clean, a surgical perfection that should not have been possible. Zareth leaned in, scanning the data feed. It defies expected fracture patterns, he murmured. The lattice didn't shatter, it parted, as if invited to separate. Vork looked up slowly. What did you do, human? Eli rested the blade's tip on the ground. Nothing new, just something old done right. The Forge Master's tone sharpened. Explain. Eli walked to the broken shard of impossible steel and lifted it gently. You build perfection, flawless bonds, symmetrical grains. You create something that can't change, can't yield. But that means when force meets it, there's nowhere for the stress to go. It breaks because it refuses to bend. He held up his own sword. This was made to live with its flaws. The layers absorb shock. Spread it. Let it breathe. That's the trick. We don't fight imperfection, we work with it. A deep silence fell over the hall. For the first time, Vork seemed at a loss. His claws flexed involuntarily. You are saying weakness makes it strong? Not weakness, Eli said softly. Balance. The alien murmuring rose to a chorus. Confusion, disbelief, awe. Even the great forge fires seemed to dim, listening. Vork stood slowly, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. Your logic is illogical, he said finally. And yet the proof stands before me.
He turned to his people. You see?
The humans forge chaos and call it strength. Ron stepped forward. We don't just call it strength. We call it survival. A ripple of tension passed through the KRYL. Vork's lower arms relaxed, the faintest trace of amusement glinting in his eyes. Perhaps the two are the same. He gestured for Eli's weapon. May I? Eli hesitated, then handed it over. The alien gripped the blade carefully, testing its balance. It vibrated faintly, a resonance that carried through his palms into his chest. Vork exhaled slowly. It sings, he whispered. Every fold, every imperfection, Eli said. They make the song. Vork nodded once, reverent. You have done what we believed impossible. You made the impossible yield. I will not call it a defeat. It is a lesson. The hall erupted in murmurs again, not of mockery now, but of curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Zareth recorded every word, his tone hushed. A historical day, he murmured. The day perfection bowed to imperfection. Captain Holt, standing at the edge of the chamber, stepped forward. So, Forge Master, what now? Will your people recognize Terran metallurgy? Vork's gaze lingered on Eli. Recognition is insufficient. Understanding will take time. But he looked down at the blade again. Perhaps the galaxy has grown quiet in its certainty. You humans bring noise. Eli smiled faintly. We're good at that. Ron nudged him. Congratulations, genius. You just gave a lecture to an interstellar blacksmith guild. Not bad for a guy who learned in his uncle's garage, Eli said. The Forge Master placed the human-forged blade back onto its pedestal, beside the broken relic of impossible steel. For a moment, both shimmered under the forge lights, one gleaming with sterile perfection, the other alive with imperfection's grace. Vork turned to the assembly. Let it be recorded. The Dominion acknowledges the Terran craft. From this day, we study the song of imperfection. The aliens bowed their heads slightly, a gesture of respect rarely offered to outsiders. Eli felt the weight of the moment, but said nothing. His hands still trembled from the strike, the hum of his creation lingering in his bones. As the ceremony concluded, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring in awe. Vork stopped Eli at the threshold. Human, he said quietly, your victory humbles us. Tell me, did you intend to teach us this lesson? Eli shook his head. I didn't come to teach you anything. I just came to make something honest. Vork regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. Honesty. Perhaps the rarest alloy of all. Eli turned to leave with Ron, but before he reached the exit, the Forge Master's voice carried across the hall once more. Elias Ward of Terra, Your forge will be remembered. Eli paused, glancing back at the glowing chamber, at the blade that still sang softly in the heat. I hope not remembered, he said quietly. I hope repeated. As they walked out into the molten dawn, the faint hum followed them, part echo, part heartbeat, part promise. Behind them, in the heart of Vorik Prime, the forge masters stood in silence before the broken and the unbroken, the perfect and the imperfect, and began to wonder which one truly belonged to the stars. Weeks passed, and the firestorms of Vorik Prime gave way to an uneasy calm. The Dominion's great forges no longer sang their sterile songs of mechanical precision. Now, under the supervision of Forge Master Vorik Tharn, alien artisans stood before molten crucibles not with computers, but with silence and contemplation. In the reflection of their own perfection, they had seen a flaw, and in that flaw, they had found beauty. Elias Ward stood at the edge of the upper foundry balcony, a protective cloak draped over his soot-stained uniform. Below him, hundreds of KRYLL worked, some cautiously folding molten sheets by hand, others studying rippling patterns forming within the cooling metal. It was a strange, almost human sight. The rhythmic clang of hammers carried upward like a heartbeat rediscovered. Ron joined him, chewing on a nutrient stick and squinting through the haze. Never thought I'd see aliens taking blacksmith lessons, he said. Eli smiled faintly. They're not copying. They're remembering. Remembering what? That craftsmanship isn't about control. It's about surrendering to the process. Eli's voice softened. They'd forgotten that even the best materials mean nothing if the maker doesn't feel the fire. Ron snorted. You've gone full philosopher. Next you'll be talking about the soul of the anvil. Maybe it has one, Eli said, eyes distant. Maybe everything we shape ends up shaping us back. Below them, Vorik appeared, his massive form moving between forges like a priest among altars. His armor was different now. Gone was the flawless, reflective sheen. Instead, the plates bore deliberate texture, layered with subtle imperfections that caught the light like ripples of liquid silver. When he noticed Eli on the balcony, he inclined his head in acknowledgement. The gesture, simple and unspoken, carried more respect than 1,000 titles. Later that cycle, in the council chamber carved from obsidian glass, Vorik presented a new artifact before the Dominion Assembly, a blade of layered metal, hand-forged and tempered through controlled chaos. When he struck it against the anvil, it sang, a low, resonant tone that made the hall tremble. The KRYLL counselors listened in reverent silence. This is the Ward pattern, Vorik declared. Born of imperfection, yet enduring beyond measure. It is proof that harmony can exist in disorder. Zureth, the archivist, recorded every word. History will remember this, as the day the Dominion unlearned certainty, he said softly. Eli stood off to the side, uncomfortable under the weight of attention. I didn't invent anything, he murmured to Ron. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. I just reminded them. That's the thing about reminders, Ron said. Sometimes they change entire civilizations. When the meeting ended, Vorik approached him privately. You are leaving soon, he said. It was not a question. Yeah, Eli replied. Captain Holtz got the ship refueled. We're heading back to the Terran Assembly for debriefing. Vorik regarded him for a long moment. You gave us a gift that cannot be measured in data or trade. The Dominion does not forget such things. He extended a hand, a massive, scaled appendage capable of crushing steel, now offered in something close to friendship. Eli grasped it without hesitation. The pressure was immense, but beneath it, he sensed care rather than dominance. Vorik's voice lowered. We spent millennia seeking flawlessness, believing that perfection would free us from weakness. But in doing so, we lost the song of the forge. You gave it back. Eli smiled. Maybe we just helped you hear what was always there. When he and Ron boarded the shuttle, the horizon of Vorik Prime glowed behind them, a sea of orange and silver. The launch pad trembled as the engines ignited. From the viewport, Eli could see dozens of alien forges lighting up across the landscape, their flames now burning in different shades, alive and uneven. The sound reached even through the hull, a faint hum carried by the planet itself. Ron glanced at him. You ever think about what you just did? You changed how an entire species makes metal. Eli leaned back in his seat, exhaustion etched into his face, but softened by satisfaction. Not really. I just made a sword. Yeah, Ron said with a grin. But apparently, the universe needed to see it. The shuttle lifted, leaving behind trails of shimmering light that danced over the molten plains. In orbit, the Terran vessel Resolute awaited their return. Captain Holt met them at the docking bay, arms crossed but smiling faintly. You two look like you crawled through a volcano. We did, Ron said.
Twice.
Holt nodded toward Eli. Command wants a report. They're calling your creation a strategic diplomatic breakthrough. Eli groaned. It's a sword, not a treaty. Tell that to the Dominion. They're sending a delegation to Earth. Something about exchanging forged traditions. Holt raised an eyebrow. Apparently, you started an interstellar artisan movement. Eli rubbed his forehead. Great. I'll open a workshop when we get home. You should, Ron said, clapping his shoulder. You'd have aliens lining up to buy blades that embrace imperfection. Eli laughed quietly. My uncle would love that. When the ship broke orbit, Vorik Prime shrank into a sphere of glowing red below them. Eli watched it until the stars swallowed it from sight. He thought of the KRYLL forges still burning, of the hammers striking in rhythm again, of the sound that was neither alien nor human but something shared. Later, in his quarters, he placed the Damascus-style blade, the prototype, the song of two worlds, on the table beside his bunk. The metal still shimmered faintly, alive with ghostly motion beneath the surface. He traced its edge with a finger and whispered, You made them remember. Outside the viewport, space stretched endless and silent, but Eli could almost hear the faint hum still echoing across the void, as if the forge's song had found its way into the stars themselves. In the Dominion's archives, Zureth recorded the final entry. The Terran taught us that imperfection is not failure. It is rhythm, it is breath, it is life. From the broken came the beautiful. From the flawed came the infinite. On Earth, years later, in a small garage where old tools hung from rusted nails, a hammer struck steel. Sparks danced in the dark. A man worked quietly beneath the hum of the forge, folding, shaping, trusting the metal to speak when it was ready. He didn't know his craft had changed the stars. He only knew the joy of creation, the ancient heartbeat of humanity echoing in every strike. And somewhere, across light years, the KRYLL forges answered.